Welcome back to the Sera Werewolf Romance Collection, where the alphas are possessive, the chemistry is lethal, and the mates are fated. Quick question for the pack before we dive into today's chaos. Where are you listening from right now? Let me know in the comments, and drop a black marker emoji, or a mustache if you have one, if you've ever pulled a prank that went delightfully wrong. Today we have a massive treat. It's hilarious, it's spicy, and it involves a sleeping alpha king, a very permanent marker, and a tailor with a death wish. But before we uncap the ink, if you want to support the channel and get early access to stories like this, hit that join button down below. It helps us keep the lights on and the romance wild. Now, grab your sewing kit and take a deep breath. The king is awake, and he wants it kissed off. Let's read. Chapter 1. The digital clock on the sleek glass wall of the Aethelgard Spire penthouse read 2:14 a.m. Outside, the rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the lights of the city below into a smeared watercolor painting. Inside, the silence was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic, deep breathing of the most terrifying man in the city. Ellie Adler sighed, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. She adjusted the white chalk pencil stuck through her messy chestnut bun, securing a stray curl that was tickling her nose. She was exhausted. Her feet, clad in sensible loafers, ached. "Turn around, please, Mr. Hale," she whispered, fully aware he couldn't hear her. Alpha Jason Hale, the CEO of Hale Holdings and the Alpha King of the Apex Sovereign Pack, was fast asleep in his massive leather wingback chair. He looked less like a corporate shark and more like a collapsed monument. His dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that looked capable of strangling a bear, and his head was lolled back against the dark leather. Ellie had been summoned here 4 hours ago for an emergency fitting. Apparently, the Alpha had shredded his last 3 suits, a hazard of the job, she assumed, and needed a full wardrobe overhaul before the Lunar Summit. She had managed to measure his inseam and waist while he was on a conference call, but the moment the call ended, he had closed his eyes for just a second and vanished into a coma-like slumber. She tapped her mother-of-pearl tape measure against her palm. She should leave. She should pack up her kit, march down to her mint green 1985 Volvo station wagon, and drive home to her cat, Sir Bartholomew. But she needed this commission. The debt her ex-boyfriend Mark had left her with was a suffocating weight, and the developers were circling her grandmother's fabric shop like vultures. She looked at Jason again. He had a sharp, angular jawline that looked like it could cut glass. A faint silver scar cut through his left eyebrow, giving him a dangerous edge even in sleep. He was intimidating, powerful, and completely vulnerable. A wicked, delirious thought sparked in Ellie's sleep-deprived brain. He made me wait 4 hours. She reached into the pocket of her high-waisted trousers and pulled out her weapon of choice, the indelible fabric marker. It was industrial grade, waterproof, ink black, and designed to mark heavy canvas and leather. It did not smudge. "Just a tiny mark," she muttered to herself, stepping closer. "A penalty fee." She leaned over him. The scent of him hit her. Spiced rum, mahogany, and crisp mountain air. It was intoxicating, making her breath hitch, but she pushed the reaction aside. With the steady hand of a master tailor, she uncapped the marker. She didn't draw a tiny mark. Possessed by a sudden burst of artistic whimsy, Ellie drew a perfect, villainous handlebar mustache on his upper lip. She curled the ends up with a flourish. She leaned back to admire her handiwork. It was magnificent. It gave his harsh face a ridiculous vaudevillian quality. "Perfect," she whispered, stifling a giggle. It was a masterpiece. It needed to be documented. Moving with the quiet stealth of a cat burglar, Ellie pulled her phone from her pocket. She snapped a quick, high-resolution photo of the sleeping Alpha King and his new villainous accessory. "For my personal collection," she mouthed. She slipped the phone back into her pocket, capped the marker, and turned to grab her heavy-duty shears from the side table. As she pivoted, the toe of her shoe caught on the edge of the thick plush rug. Ellie pitched forward. She flailed, her hand slapping against Jason's solid chest to break her fall. Jason's eyes snapped open. They weren't the groggy, confused eyes of a man waking up. They were ice blue, glowing with a sudden, terrifying luminescence. His hand shot up, clamping around her wrist with a speed that blurred the air. He didn't squeeze, but the grip was immovable. Ellie froze, her face inches from his. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Jason blinked, the alpha glow fading slightly as he focused on her. He stared at her amber eyes, then his gaze dropped to her mouth, and finally, he looked past her to his reflection in the darkened window pane behind her. He saw it. The black, curled mustache. He looked back at her. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He didn't yell. He didn't roar. He just pulled her slightly closer, his voice a low, subterranean rumble that vibrated through her sternum. "You have 2 options, Tailor," he growled. "Scrub it off or kiss it off." Chapter 2. The silence that followed Jason's demand was thick enough to cut with Ellie's shears. She stared at him, her brain short-circuiting. "Kiss it off?" Ellie stammered, pulling back. To her surprise, he released her wrist immediately, though his gaze remained heavy on her face. "I think scrubbing is the more sanitary option for both of us, Mr. Hale." Jason sat up, rubbing a hand over his face, stopping abruptly before he touched the mustache. He looked at his hand, then back at the window reflection. He looked like a man trying to solve a complex calculus equation while realizing he was naked. "Why?" he asked, his voice rough with sleep and irritation. "Why would you do that?" "You fell asleep," Ellie said, her defensive walls snapping into place. "For 4 hours. I bill by the hour, but my time is also valuable. Consider it a stylistic protest." Jason stood up. He was massive. The sheer scale of him made the spacious penthouse feel suddenly cramped. He walked to the sleek gas fireplace, which was currently off, looking cold and modern, and pressed a button on the wall panel. A mirror slid open to reveal a hidden wet bar. He grabbed a napkin and dipped it in a glass of water. "It's just marker," he muttered, scrubbing at his lip. "Actually," Ellie winced, "it's a Dynomark 4000, industrial fabric ink. It's designed to withstand chemical washing and extreme heat." Jason froze. He pulled the napkin away. The mustache remained, pristine and jet black. The water had merely made his skin damp. He turned to face her slowly. The ice blue of his eyes was sharp, calculating, and terrifyingly calm. "I have a board meeting with the shareholders in 20 minutes. It is a video conference. I am closing a merger that is worth more than the GDP of a small country." Ellie swallowed hard. "Oh. If I appear on that screen looking like a cartoon villain," Jason said, stepping closer, "my stock drops. If my stock drops, the pack finances take a hit. If the finances take a hit, I get very, very angry." He loomed over her, utilizing every inch of his height. "You will fix this. Right now." "I can't just wish it away," Ellie argued, though she took a step back. "I need—" "If you cannot remove this," Jason interrupted, his voice dropping to that lethal, quiet tone again. I will sue you for damages. I will sue your business. I will sue your personal accounts. And I will ensure the only thing you ever tailor again is prison jumpsuits. The threat hit its mark. Ellie thought of her grandmother's shop, of the pile of red notices on her kitchen counter. She couldn't afford a parking ticket, let alone a lawsuit from Hale Holdings. Solvent, she blurted out. Jason raised an eyebrow, the one with the scar through it. Excuse me? I have a specific solvent, she explained hurriedly, pointing towards the elevator. In my car, the Volvo. It dissolves the ink bond. It's the only thing that works without taking your skin off. Jason checked his watch. You have 3 minutes to get it and get back up here. Run. Ellie didn't argue. She spun on her heel, her loafers squeaking on the hardwood, and sprinted for the elevator. As the doors closed, she saw the alpha king of the city standing in the middle of his multi-million-dollar penthouse, looking furiously at his reflection, the handlebar mustache twitching as he clenched his jaw. She had to fix this. Fast. Chapter 3. Ellie's mint green 1985 Volvo station wagon was a tank, but it was also a chaotic storage unit on wheels. She tore through the trunk, shoving aside a headless mannequin and 3 bolts of wool until her fingers closed around the small metal tin of specialized solvent and a scrap of clean white muslin. She sprinted back through the lobby, ignoring the confused look of the night concierge, and jabbed the penthouse button in the elevator. Her chest was heaving by the time the doors slid open. Jason was waiting for her. He had changed into a fresh white dress shirt, though the sleeves were already rolled up, exposing his forearms. He was pacing. 2 minutes, he said, not looking at her as he pointed to the chair she had vacated earlier. Fix it. He sat down, gripping the armrests like he was bracing for impact. Ellie uncapped the tin. The smell of harsh chemicals wafted out, sharp and acrid, clashing violently with the warm, spicy scent of rum and mahogany that seemed to cling to Jason. This might sting, she warned. She poured the solvent onto a clean cotton cloth. She had to step between his spread knees to get the right angle. She hesitated for a fraction of a second. This was too close. I don't bite, Miss Adler, Jason gritted out, his eyes closed. Unless provoked. Get on with it. Ellie moved in. She placed one hand on his jaw to steady his head. His skin was burning hot, a furnace beneath her cool fingertips. The moment she touched him, a jolt of static electricity snapped between them, sharp enough that she almost dropped the cloth. Jason's eyes flew open. They locked onto hers, his pupils dilated, swallowing the ice-blue iris. He inhaled sharply, his nostrils flaring as if he was trying to drag her scent, linen and lavender, deep into his lungs. Don't move, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. She began to scrub. The ink was stubborn. She had to press hard, rubbing the cloth over his upper lip. The friction was intimate, bordering on inappropriate. She was staring at his mouth, watching the black ink slowly dissolve onto the white cloth. He was staring at her throat, his breathing becoming heavier, deeper. It's coming off, she murmured, trying to focus on the task and not the fact that the Alpha King was trembling slightly under her touch. You smell, Jason started, his voice sounding wrecked. He stopped himself, clearing his throat aggressively. You smell like chemicals. Occupational hazard, Ellie quipped, though her heart was racing. She gave one final, firm wipe. Done. She pulled back. The mustache was gone. However, in its place was a bright, angry red patch of scrubbed raw skin shaped exactly like a handlebar mustache. Jason stood up and marched to the mirror. He stared at the red mark. It looked like a rash or a burn. "It looks like I have a skin disease," he said flatly. "The redness will fade," Ellie promised, capping the solvent tin. "In an hour or two." "I have the meeting in 8 minutes," Jason said, turning to her. The panic was gone, replaced by a cold, steely resolve. "You have makeup. Women carry makeup." I have concealer," Ellie stammered. "But it might not match your skin tone perfectly." "Apply it," Jason commanded, sitting back down. "Make it look like skin. Do it now." Ellie scrambled for her purse. This night was turning into a hallucination. She found her tube of concealer. She had to step back between his knees. She had to touch his face again. As she dabbed the makeup onto his raw skin, blending it with her pinky finger, Jason didn't close his eyes this time. He watched her. His gaze was heavy, tangible, tracing the line of her jaw, the curl of her hair. He looked like a starving man watching a feast he wasn't allowed to eat. Chapter 4. The board meeting had been a success. Or, at least, Jason hadn't been fired. The concealer had held up under the low-resolution scrutiny of the webcam, making him look merely tired rather than disfigured. Now, an hour later, the penthouse was quiet again. Ellie was packing her kit, her hands still shaking slightly. She wanted to leave before he remembered he could sue her. "Ms. Adler." Jason's voice stopped her at the door. She turned. He was standing by the large oak desk, holding a tablet. Joe, his beta and executive assistant, had arrived 10 minutes ago and was standing silently by the wall, looking tired and unbothered. "Yes, Mr. Hale?" "I had Joe run a background check on you while I was in my meeting," Jason said, tapping the screen. Ellie's blood ran cold. "Is that legal?" "I own the security firm that processes the data, so yes," Jason said, ignoring the nuance. "Ellie Adler, owner of The Stitched Wolf, currently carrying $85,000 in debt, mostly from high-interest loans taken out in your name by a Mr. Mark Denton." Ellie clutched her bag tighter. Shame burned in her chest. "That is none of your business." "The bank is foreclosing on a property at 42 Briar Lane next week," Jason continued, reading off the screen. "Adler's Fabrics, your grandmother's shop." "I am handling it," Ellie said, her voice tight. "I am on a payment plan." "You are drowning," Jason corrected, his tone devoid of pity. It was just a statement of fact. He set the tablet down. "But you are also talented. That suit you tailored for the mayor last month? The shoulder construction was impeccable." Ellie blinked, thrown off balance by the sudden compliment. Thank you." "I have a problem, Ms. Adler," Jason said, walking around the desk. "My public image is severe. The board thinks I am unstable because I work too much and have no personal life. They want me to appear settled before the Lunar Summit next month. They want to see a softer side of the apex sovereign." He stopped in front of her. "I need a fiancé." Ellie laughed. It was a dry, incredulous sound. "Good luck with that. Try Tinder." "I don't have time for dating apps," Jason said, dismissing the idea with a wave of his hand. "I need someone who can dress me so I don't look like a mercenary. I need someone who understands discretion. And I need someone who needs money." He looked her dead in the eye. "I will pay off your debt. All of it. The loans, the shop, everything. In exchange, you will live here for 4 weeks. You will act as my stylist and my fiancé for the summit. You will ensure I look perfect, and you will smile for the cameras." Ellie's mouth fell open. "You want to hire me to fake date you?" "I want to hire you to solve a problem," Jason said. "It is a business transaction. Joe has the NDA ready." Ellie looked at Joe, who shrugged and held up a thick folder. She looked back at Jason. He was arrogant, bossy, and dangerously attractive. But $85,000. That was her freedom. That was her grandmother's legacy saved. "I have conditions," Ellie said, straightening her spine. Jason narrowed his eyes. "You are not in a position to negotiate." "I am if you want this to look real," Ellie countered. 1, you do not command me. No alpha voice. Ever." Jason paused, then nodded once. "Agreed." 2, we sleep in separate rooms." "Obviously," Jason drawled. "I value my sleep." 3, Ellie took a deep breath. "I have a dependent. He comes with me. Non-negotiable." Jason frowned. "A child? The report didn't mention a child." "A cat," Ellie corrected. "Sir Bartholomew. He requires high-quality wet food and a south-facing window." Jason stared at her. "You want to bring an animal into my penthouse? I have pristine Italian leather furniture." "He has pristine manners," Ellie lied. "Take it or leave it, Your Highness." Jason clenched his jaw. He looked at the time. He looked at her determined amber eyes. "Fine," he growled. "Bring the cat. But if he claws the sofa, I'm deducting it from your final payment." Ellie smiled, a genuine, sharp smile. "Deal." Chapter 5. The rain had finally stopped, leaving Luminova City scrubbed clean and glistening under the gray morning light. By the time Ellie pulled her mint green 1985 Volvo station wagon up to the service entrance of the Aethelgard Spire, she had been awake for nearly 24 hours. Joe, Jason's stoic beta assistant, was waiting by the freight elevator. He looked at the Volvo, then at the pile of cardboard boxes, 3 mannequins, and a very angry cat carrier in the back seat. "The Alpha is sleeping," Joe said, his voice low. "He has been awake for 3 days. If we wake him, I cannot guarantee your safety." "Understood," Ellie whispered. She adjusted the white chalk pencil in her messy bun. It was slipping due to the humidity. "We'll be ninjas." Moving in was a military operation. Joe carried the heavy boxes of fabric and the mannequins with supernatural ease, while Ellie was entrusted with the most volatile cargo, Sir Bartholomew. The penthouse was silent and cool. The air still smelled faintly of the solvent Ellie had used earlier, mixed with Jason's lingering scent of mahogany. Ellie crept toward the guest suite Joe pointed out. It was larger than her entire apartment, furnished with cream-colored Italian leather that looked obscenely expensive. "Perfect," she muttered. She set the carrier down and unlatched the door. Sir Bartholomew exploded from the cage. The exotic short-hair, with his squashed face and judgmental orange eyes, did not explore tentatively. He marched into the living room like an inspector condemning a building. "Bart, behave!" Ellie hissed, chasing after him. The cat ignored her. He made a beeline for the massive, pristine leather sofa in the center of the room. But before he could sink his claws in, he stopped. He sniffed the air. His ears swiveled toward the hallway leading to the master bedroom. "No," Ellie whispered, reaching for him. "Bart, that is the forbidden zone." Sir Bartholomew trotted down the hall. Ellie sprinted on her tiptoes, her socks sliding on the polished hardwood. She rounded the corner just in time to see the cat hop onto the master bed. Jason was sprawled face down on the mattress, one arm hanging off the side. He was shirtless, the muscles of his back defined and tense even in sleep. He looked like a fallen statue. Ellie froze. She held her breath, praying the cat would just curl up at the foot of the bed. Instead, Sir Bartholomew walked right up to Jason's head. He sniffed the alpha's hair. Then, with a purr that sounded like a diesel engine, the cat sat directly on the back of Jason's neck. Jason groaned. He didn't wake up fully, but he shifted, rolling onto his side. He reached up, his large hand blindly grasping the cat. He didn't throw it. He didn't crush it. He pulled the chubby, furry creature against his chest like a teddy bear. "Soft," Jason mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. Ellie stood paralyzed in the doorway. The terrifying Alpha King, who had threatened to sue her into oblivion hours ago, was now cuddling her cat. She backed away slowly, her heart doing a strange flutter that she blamed entirely on sleep deprivation. She retreated to the guest room, unpacked her pajamas, flannel pants covered in cartoon sheep, and collapsed onto her own bed. She woke up hours later to the sound of a scream. It wasn't a terrified scream. It was a startle reflex. Ellie scrambled out of bed, grabbing her heavy-duty shears from the nightstand out of instinct, and ran into the living room. Jason was standing by the kitchen island, holding a coffee mug. He was wearing gray sweatpants and nothing else. He was staring at Sir Bartholomew, who was sitting on the counter, drinking milk out of Jason's cereal bowl. Jason looked up, his ice-blue eyes wide. He looked at the cat, then at Ellie, who was wielding giant scissors and wearing sheep pants. "It's in my cereal," Jason said, pointing a trembling finger at the cat. "The animal is eating my protein." "He likes almond milk," Ellie said, lowering the scissors. "And good morning to you too, fake fiancé." Chapter 6. 2 days later, the domestic truce was shattered. The battlefield was Jason's walk-in closet, a cavernous space filled with rows of black, gray, and darker gray clothing. "Burn it," Ellie said, standing with her hands on her hips. "Burn it all!" Jason stood in the doorway, arms crossed over his chest. He was wearing a black tactical t-shirt that was so tight across the shoulders, Ellie worried the seams would surrender. The red rash on his upper lip had finally faded, leaving his skin flawless again, much to Ellie's relief. "These are functional, tactical garments," Jason argued. "They are Kevlar weave. They are fire-resistant." "They are ugly," Ellie countered, pulling a shapeless jacket off a hanger. "You are the Alpha King, Jason. You aren't a bouncer at a dive bar. You need to look regal. You need to look like you own the city, not like you're about to rob a bank." "I hate suits," Jason grumbled, stepping into the room. "They restrict my range of motion. If I have to fight, I shred them. It's a waste of money." "That's because you're buying off the rack," Ellie said, tossing the jacket into a large black trash bag she had labeled "Crimes Against Fashion." "You have broad shoulders and a narrow waist. You're built like a triangle. Standard cuts don't work for you." She turned to him, holding up her mother-of-pearl tape measure. "Take off the shirt." Jason froze. "Excuse me?" "I need your measurements," Ellie said, stepping closer. "The real ones. Not what your assistant guessed. If I'm going to make you a suit that moves with you, I need to map your musculature." Jason hesitated. He looked at the tape measure, then at Ellie's determined amber eyes. Slowly, he reached down and pulled the black t-shirt over his head. Ellie's mouth went dry. Seeing him shirtless while he was asleep was one thing. Seeing him shirtless, awake, and standing 2 feet away was entirely different. His torso was a map of hard ridges and old scars. "Arms up," she commanded, her voice sounding a little too high. Jason complied. Ellie wrapped the cool tape measure around his chest. She had to step into his space, her knuckles grazing his skin. He was warm, radiating a heat that seemed to seep through her clothes. She pulled the tape tight. 48 inches, she murmured, writing it down on her notepad. She moved to his waist. She had to kneel. Jason flinched. "Relax," Ellie said, glancing up. "I'm just measuring your inseam." "I am relaxed," Jason lied. Ellie stood back up to measure his neck. She rested her hands on his shoulders to steady herself. Under her palms, his muscles were rock hard. She leaned in to read the numbers. Her wrist brushed against the pulse point of his neck. Beep, beep, beep. The smartwatch on Jason's wrist let out a rapid, high-pitched alarm. Ellie jumped back. "What is that?" she asked. "Is it a bomb?" Jason looked at the watch, his face turning a shade of red that had nothing to do with solvent irritation. He quickly tapped the screen to silence it. "Heart rate monitor," he muttered, grabbing a fresh shirt from a shelf and pulling it on with aggressive speed. "It alerts me if my tachycardia spikes. It's a combat stress indicator." Ellie stared at him. "Combat stress? I was measuring your neck." "You have cold hands," Jason grunted, refusing to meet her eyes. "It was a survival reflex. Are we done?" Ellie smirked. She tucked the tape measure back into her pocket. "For now, Your Highness, but don't think I didn't notice. The big bad alpha is ticklish." Chapter 7. The Lunar Charity Gala was the first test. It was being held at the Luminova Opera House, a venue dripping with gold leaf and old money pretension. Ellie had spent 3 days constructing Jason's suit. She had chosen a deep, midnight blue wool that looked black in the shadows but shimmered under direct light. She had reinforced the seams with double stitching and added hidden gussets under the arms to allow for full range of motion. When Jason walked out of his bedroom, adjusting his cuffs, Ellie actually stopped breathing for a second. The suit fit him like a second skin. It didn't hide his power. It streamlined it. He looked lethal, expensive, and devastating. "It doesn't pull," Jason said, rolling his shoulders experimentally. He looked surprised. "I can move." "I told you," Ellie said, smoothing the lapel of her own dress, a vintage silk slip dress she had altered to fit her curves. "I'm a genius." The ride to the gala was silent. Joe drove the armored matte black SUV. Jason sat stiffly, his eyes scanning the passing streets, counting exits, counting threats. "Relax," Ellie whispered, reaching over to pat his knee before snatching her hand back. "It's just a party. Eat some tiny crab cakes, smile, leave." "It's not the party," Jason said, his voice low. "It's the press. They are vultures." The SUV pulled up to the red carpet. The flashbulbs were blinding even through the tinted windows. It looked like a lightning storm outside. Joe opened the door. "Showtime." Jason stepped out first. A roar went up from the crowd. He turned and offered his hand to Ellie. She took it. His grip was firm, grounding. They stepped onto the carpet. The noise was a physical wall. Shouting photographers, screaming fans, the aggressive questions from reporters. "Alpha Hale! Is it true the pack stocks are down?" "Who is the girl? Is she a human?" "Look here! Look here!" Ellie stumbled slightly as a photographer thrust a camera lens inches from her face. A low, vibrating growl ripped through the air. It wasn't human. It was deep, guttural, and terrifying. The crowd went instantly silent. Jason had moved. In a blur of motion, he had placed himself between Ellie and the aggressive photographer. He wrapped one massive arm around her waist, pulling her flush against his side. His eyes were flashing with that eerie, ice-blue luminescence. He glared at the cameraman with the promise of violence. "Back up," Jason commanded. The photographer scrambled back, pale as a sheet. Then, the silence broke. The flashes went off like a supernova. "Did you see that?" someone whispered. "He's protective. He's possessive. They must be mated. Look at his eyes." Ellie looked up at Jason. He wasn't looking at the cameras. He was looking down at her, checking for injuries, his expression fierce and terrified that he had failed to shield her. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, ignoring the hundreds of people watching. "I'm fine," Ellie whispered, her heart racing. "Jason, the cameras. Smile." Jason blinked, the glow fading. He looked at the crowd. He didn't smile. That would be asking too much. But he kept his arm tight around her waist. He guided her toward the entrance, shielding her with his body until they were inside the safety of the opera house. The headlines the next morning wouldn't talk about stocks. They would talk about the Alpha King who nearly mauled a paparazzi for getting too close to his fiancée. Chapter 8. The morning after the gala, Ellie woke up feeling like she had won the lottery. The press was glowing. The fake engagement was being hailed as the romance of the century. Jason's approval ratings were up 15%. She was in the penthouse kitchen, feeding Sir Bartholomew his premium wet food, when her phone buzzed on the marble counter. She picked it up, expecting a text from her grandmother. It wasn't. "Saw you on TV last night, Elle. You look expensive. I guess you moved on fast." Ellie's stomach dropped. She knew that texting style. She knew the passive-aggressive tone. Mark. Her fingers trembled as she unlocked the phone. Another message came through immediately. "Does your new king know about the $85,000 debt? Does he know you used to cry in the bathroom because you couldn't afford rent? I have photos, Elle, from the bad months, the eviction notices, the ones where you look like a mess." Ellie leaned against the counter, suddenly unable to breathe. The kitchen, usually so bright and airy, felt like it was shrinking. It would be a shame if the tabloids found out the Alpha's fiancé is a broke charity case. I bet they'd pay a lot for that story. Or maybe you can help an old friend out. $20,000 by tonight. "Ellie?" She jumped, nearly dropping the phone. Jason walked into the kitchen. He was wearing the sweatpants again, looking rumpled and relaxed. He looked happy, or as happy as Jason ever looked. "Joe says the stock jump is holding," Jason said, opening the fridge. "You did good last night." Ellie shoved the phone into her pocket. Her hands were ice cold. She forced a smile, but she knew it looked brittle. That's great, Jason." Jason paused. He closed the fridge door slowly. He turned to look at her, his amber eyes narrowing. He didn't need a heart rate monitor to know something was wrong. He could smell the distress coming off her, the sharp, sour scent of fear spiking through her usual lavender aroma. "What happened?" Jason asked, his voice dropping an octave. "Nothing," Ellie lied, turning away to stroke the cat. "Just reading the comments. People are mean." "Do not read the comments," Jason said, stepping closer. "They are irrelevant." He waited for her to look at him. She didn't. She couldn't. If he found out about Mark, about the blackmail, he would see her as a liability, a weakness. He would realize she wasn't the strong, competent partner he needed. He would fire her. And she needed this money. She needed to save her grandmother. "I'm going to go to the studio," Ellie said, grabbing her coffee and bolting for the hallway. "I have to fix the hem on your gray trousers." Jason watched her go. He didn't follow. But as she disappeared into her room, he pulled his own phone from his pocket. "Joe," he said into the receiver, his eyes dark. "Ellie is hiding something. Check her phone records. Now." Chapter 9. Ellie Adler sat on the floor of the guest suite, surrounded by swatches of Italian wool, but she wasn't seeing any of them. Her phone sat on the carpet like a ticking bomb. Mark had sent another text. "Clock's ticking, Elle. 6 p.m., or I send the eviction notice to TMZ." It was 4:15 p.m. She had $200 in her checking account and a stomach full of acid. She couldn't ask Jason. He was the Alpha King. He dealt with international treaties and corporate mergers. If he found out his fiancée was being blackmailed by a low-life ex over rent money, he would see her as a liability. He would cancel the contract. She would lose the shop. The door to her suite opened. Ellie jumped, snatching up her phone. Jason stood in the doorway. He had showered and changed into dark jeans and a black button-down shirt, sleeves rolled up to the elbows. He didn't look angry. He looked frighteningly calm. "Come with me," he said. It wasn't a question. Ellie's heart hammered against her ribs. I'm busy, Jason. I have to finish the lining for—" "Bring the phone," Jason interrupted, his voice dropping to a low, vibrating rumble that made the hair on her arms stand up. Ellie froze. He knew. She followed him into the living room. Joe was there, sitting at the dining table with a laptop and a stack of papers. He didn't look up. "Sit," Jason commanded, pointing to the chair opposite Joe. Ellie sat. She clutched her phone until her knuckles turned white. "Jason, I can explain. It's not—" "Mark Denton," Jason said, leaning against the edge of the table. He crossed his massive arms. 28 years old, unemployed, 3 arrests for petty theft, currently residing in a basement apartment in the Briar district. Ellie stared at him. "How—" "You are living in my house," Jason said, his ice blue eyes locking onto hers. "You are under my protection. Did you really think I wouldn't know when someone threatens you?" "I didn't want to bother you," Ellie whispered, shame heating her cheeks. "It's my mess. He just wants $20,000. I was going to—" "You were going to what?" Jason asked, his voice sharp. "Pay him?" "Blackmailers don't stop when you pay them, Ellie. They stop when you break them." He nodded to Joe. "Show her." Joe turned the laptop screen toward Ellie. It was a live feed of a bank account, Mark's bank account. "At 4 p.m., Mr. Denton attempted to access his funds," Joe said in his dry, monotone voice. "He found his accounts frozen due to a pending investigation for fraud." "Fraud?" Ellie asked. "He filed a false insurance claim on a 2010 Honda Civic 2 years ago," Jason said casually. "We just reminded the authorities." Joe tapped a key. At 4:05 p.m., his landlord received a notice that the sublease on his apartment was illegal. He is currently being evicted, as we speak. "And finally," Jason said, pushing off the table and towering over her, "I bought his debt. All of it. Credit cards, student loans, the gambling debts he owes to the Iron River Pack. I own him." Ellie looked from the screen to Jason. In 10 minutes, Jason had systematically dismantled Mark's entire life without raising his voice. "He called you a charity case," Jason said, his voice dropping to a growl that rumbled through the floorboards. "He threatened to humiliate you. So I removed his ability to speak." He placed a hand on the table, leaned down until his face was inches from hers. The scent of spiced rum and mahogany wrapped around her, heavy and protective. Your problems are my problems, Ellie. Do not hide things from me again. Ellie swallowed hard, looking up at him. She should be terrified. This was a display of ruthless, terrifying power. But looking at his fierce, unyielding expression, she didn't feel afraid. She felt safe. "Okay," she whispered. "Good." Jason straightened up, checking his watch. "Now go back to work. You have a suit to finish." Chapter 10. It was 3 a.m. The Aethelgard Spire was silent, wrapped in the stillness of the sleeping city. Ellie woke up because Sir Bartholomew was meowing. It wasn't his usual "feed me" demand. It was a low, distressed yowl coming from the hallway. She rubbed her eyes, grabbed her robe, and padded out of the guest room. The penthouse was dark, lit only by the ambient glow of the city lights filtering through the rain-streaked windows. "Bart?" she whispered. The cat was sitting outside Jason's bedroom door, scratching at the wood. Ellie hesitated. The master bedroom was the forbidden zone. But then she heard it. A sound from inside the room. A choked, ragged gasp, followed by a thud, as if something heavy had hit the floor. "Jason?" She didn't wait. She pushed the door open. The room was freezing. Jason liked it cold. He was thrashing on the bed, tangled in the dark sheets. He was soaked in sweat, his chest heaving. "No," he moaned, his voice broken and unrecognizable. "Too many. Hold the line." He was having a nightmare. A bad one. Ellie rushed to the bed. "Jason, wake up!" She reached out to shake his shoulder. The moment her hand touched his damp skin, Jason reacted with pure instinct. He moved faster than humanly possible. In a blur, he grabbed her wrist and flipped her. Ellie gasped as she hit the mattress, Jason pinning her down with his body weight. His forearm pressed against her throat, not crushing, but threatening. His eyes were open, but they weren't seeing her. They were glowing a feral, blind blue. He was snarling, teeth bared. "Jason!" Ellie choked out, her heart hammering against his chest. "It's me! It's Ellie!" She didn't fight him. She knew she couldn't win. Instead, she reached up with her free hand and cupped his cheek, running her thumb over the rough stubble of his jaw. "Jason," she said softly, forcing her voice to be steady. "You're safe. You're in the penthouse. It's Ellie." The scent of her, lavender and beeswax, seemed to penetrate the fog of his PTSD. Jason blinked. The glow in his eyes flickered and died, leaving them wide and terrified. He realized what he was doing. He realized he was pinning her down. He scrambled back as if she burned him. He fell off the bed, backing into the corner of the room, his chest heaving. "I didn't," he gasped, running a hand through his sweat-dampened hair. "I didn't mean... Did I hurt you?" Ellie sat up, rubbing her wrist. "I'm fine. You didn't hurt me." "I could have," Jason whispered, his voice trembling. He looked at his hands like they were foreign weapons. "I could have snapped your neck. Get out. You shouldn't be here." "I'm not leaving," Ellie said. She slid off the bed and walked slowly toward him. He looked shattered. The arrogant billionaire was gone. This was just a man haunted by ghosts she didn't know. She sat down on the floor in front of him, keeping a respectful distance. Sir Bartholomew trotted in and curled up against Jason's leg. "Was it the war?" Ellie asked softly. Jason nodded, staring at the floor. "The border skirmishes," 5 years ago. We lost a lot of good wolves. Ellie didn't offer empty platitudes. She just reached out and took his hand. It was huge, calloused, and trembling. She held it in both of hers. "You're not there," she said firmly. "You're here, with me, and the cat." Jason looked at her. His amber eyes were raw, stripped of all defenses. He squeezed her hand, holding on like she was an anchor in a storm. "Stay?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "I'll stay," Ellie promised. He fell asleep 10 minutes later, his head resting awkwardly against the wall, his hand still gripping hers. Ellie didn't move until dawn. Chapter 11. 3 days later. The dynamic in the penthouse had shifted. Jason was no longer just the boss. He was the man who held her hand in the dark. But in the daylight, the walls were back up, though they were thinner now. They were in the library, a room lined with books Jason actually read. Ellie was doing the final fitting for the summit suit. "Arms up," Ellie murmured, stepping into his space. Jason complied, but his eyes tracked her every movement. He was wearing the trousers of the suit, a dark charcoal wool with a subtle silver thread, and a crisp white dress shirt unbuttoned. Ellie adjusted the waistcoat. She had to stand close, her body brushing against his. The air between them was thick, charged with a static tension that made her fingers tingle. She smoothed the fabric over his chest. "I added a hidden pocket here," she said, her voice sounding breathless. "For your phone, or whatever alpha things you carry." "Knives," Jason murmured, looking down at her. "Usually knives." Ellie laughed nervously. She moved around to his back to check the fit across his shoulders. "Well, don't put knives in my Italian wool. It ruins the drape." She tightened the cinch at the back of the waistcoat. Her hands lingered on the muscles of his back. He was so warm. She could feel the heat of him through the shirt. Jason shifted. "Ellie." "Yes?" She came back around to face him to check the buttons. He looked down at her. His pupils were blown wide, swallowing the blue. The heart rate monitor on his wrist, which he hadn't taken off since she noticed it, beeped once. Beep. Then again. Beep. "You're shaking," he said softly. Ellie looked at her hands. They were trembling slightly as she tried to button the top button of his waistcoat. "I'm just tired. The caffeine." "Liar," Jason rumbled. He reached out and covered her hands with his. His palms were rough, warm, and encompassed hers completely. He stopped her fidgeting. He took a step closer. Ellie had to tilt her head back to look at him. He was so tall. "It fits," Jason said, his voice a low gravel. "It feels like armor. Better than armor." "It's just clothes, Jason," Ellie whispered, unable to look away from his mouth. "No," Jason said. He released her hands but didn't step back. He raised one hand and tucked a loose curl behind her ear, his knuckles grazing her cheekbone. "It's protection. You made it for me." He leaned in. He was going to kiss her. Ellie knew it. Her breath hitched. She wanted him to. She wanted to know what that stern, demanding mouth felt like. The elevator chimed. Jason froze. He pulled back, his expression snapping from intimate to guarded in a millisecond. The door slid open. Joe stepped out, looking grim. "Alpha," Joe said. "We have a visitor. Security couldn't stop him." Jason buttoned his shirt in one swift motion, the mask of the king sliding back into place. "Who?" "Alpha Cade," Joe said. "He's in the lobby." Chapter 12. The lobby of the Aethelgard Spire was a cavernous space of marble and glass, designed to intimidate anyone who entered. But Alpha Cade, the head of the Iron River Pack, did not look intimidated. He looked bored. Cade was the opposite of Jason. Where Jason was dark, rugged, and imposing, Cade was sleek, blonde, and polished. He wore a suit that screamed exorbitant wealth. Ellie's entire life, but it looked store-bought compared to what she made. Ellie stood by the elevator bank, watching as Jason strode across the marble floor to meet him. Joe stood at Jason's shoulder. Ellie stayed back, clutching her notebook. "Cade," Jason said, stopping 10 feet away. He didn't offer a hand. "You're trespassing." "I'm visiting," Cade smiled. It was a shark's smile, all teeth and dead eyes. "I heard rumors, Jason. They say the apex wolf has finally been domesticated. I wanted to see the little woman who put a leash on you." Jason's growl was low, barely audible, but Ellie felt it in her chest. "Careful." Cade's eyes slid past Jason and landed on Ellie. He looked her up and down with open disdain. "This?" Cade laughed softly. "This is the fiancé? She smells like turpentine and cheap fabric softener." Ellie bristled. She stepped forward before she could stop herself. "It's actually lavender and beeswax," she said, her voice echoing in the large space. "And I'd rather smell like turpentine than like whatever cologne that is. Desperation, with notes of insecurity." Joe coughed to hide a laugh. Cade's smile vanished. He took a step toward Ellie. "You have a sharp tongue for an Omega. In my pack, you'd be taught silence." Jason moved. He didn't run, he just appeared between them. He blocked Cade's view of Ellie completely. His posture was loose but ready to kill. "She isn't in your pack, Cade," Jason said, his voice flat and deadly. "And if you look at her again, you won't be walking out of this building." Cade paused. He looked at Jason, assessing the threat. He saw the tension in Jason's shoulders, the way his hands were curled into fists. He laughed again, stepping back. "Touchy," Cade said, smoothing his lapel. "I just came to drop off a gift for the happy couple." He signaled to one of his bodyguards, who placed a small, velvet-wrapped box on the reception desk. "See you at the summit, Jason," Cade said. He winked at Ellie, or tried to, around Jason's shoulder. "Wear something nice, darling. It's going to be a bloodbath." Cade turned and swept out of the building, his entourage trailing behind him. Jason didn't move until the doors closed. Then he turned to Ellie. He grabbed her shoulders, his grip tight. "Did he touch you?" Jason demanded. "Did he use his voice?" "No," Ellie said, looking up at him. "He just insulted my fabric softener." Jason didn't smile. He looked at the door, his jaw clenched so hard a muscle feathered in his cheek. "He's not just a rival," Jason said quietly. "He's a poisoner, and he just declared war." Jason turned to Joe. "Sweep the building, again, and throw that box in the incinerator. Do not open it." "Jason," Ellie said, touching his arm, "what happens at the summit?" Jason looked down at her, his eyes bleak. "At the summit, we don't just talk, Ellie. We survive. And Cade is going to try to ensure I don't." Chapter 13. The Velvet Box. Alpha Cade had left behind was currently being incinerated in the basement furnace, but the stench of his cologne, a cloying mix of musk and something metallic, seemed to linger in the lobby air like a bad omen. "I need to check the van," Ellie said, breaking the silence. She was still clutching her notebook, her knuckles white. "I have the lining for the summit suit in the back. If that silk gets wrinkled, I have to steam it for hours." Jason, whose ice blue eyes were still tracking the exit Kate had used, nodded sharply. "Joe, escort her." They took the service elevator down to the secure parking garage. It was a concrete bunker filled with Jason's fleet of matte black armored SUVs. In the corner, looking cheerfully out of place, was Ellie's mint green 1985 Volvo station wagon. Except something was wrong. The driver's side door was ajar. "Wait," Joe said, stepping in front of her. He drew a sidearm from his jacket. "Stay behind me." He swept the area, moving with a fluid, practiced efficiency. "Clear," he called out a moment later, holstering the weapon. But his expression was grim. Ellie ran to the car. She stopped dead. The invincible Volvo, the tank that had survived 4 harsh winters and a collision with a dumpster, had been violated. The windows were smashed, the safety glass glittering like diamonds on the concrete floor. The tires were slashed, resting sadly on their rims. But it was the interior that made Ellie's breath hitch. Her mannequins were decapitated, their foam heads rolling on the floor. And the fabric. Ellie reached in, pulling out a bolt of midnight blue Italian wool, the backup fabric for Jason's suit. It was shredded. Someone had taken a knife and dragged it through the layers, reducing thousands of dollars of material to expensive confetti. "My shears," Ellie whispered, spotting them embedded deep in the dashboard vinyl. A note was speared onto the blade. "Next time, we skin the wolf." Ellie felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't just vandalism. It was a promise. She leaned against the side of the car, her legs shaking. "I can't do this," she whispered. Jason appeared at her side. He must have followed them down. He looked at the ruined car, then at the note. His face was a mask of terrifying neutrality, but the air around him grew heavy and static-charged. "It's just things," Jason said, his voice low. "It's not just things!" Ellie turned to him, tears of frustration stinging her eyes. "It's my livelihood! It's my safety! Jason, I'm a tailor. I sew buttons. I don't deal with turf wars and death threats. I can't be your fiancé. I'm a liability. You need someone from your world, someone who knows how to dodge bullets." She started to walk away, wiping her eyes furiously. "I quit. I'll pack my things. You can keep the money. I'll figure out the debt." A hand clamped around her arm. Jason spun her around, pulling her into his chest. He didn't hug her. He held her there, forcing her to look at him. His eyes were burning with that feral blue light. "You do not quit," he growled. "You are not a liability. You are the target because you are valuable." "I'm a weakness!" Ellie cried. "No," Jason said, his hands moving to cup her face, his thumbs brushing away the tears. "Cade struck your car because he couldn't get to you. He is afraid. He saw the way I looked at you, and he knows." "Knows what?" Ellie whispered, trembling. "That you are mine," Jason said. The words hung in the damp air of the garage, heavy and absolute. "We do not run, Ellie. We fight back." Jason looked at Joe. "Secure the evidence. Get her tools." Joe stepped forward and yanked the heavy-duty shears out of the dashboard with a grunt, removing the note. He handed the shears back to Ellie. She clutched the cold metal to her chest, her only weapon in a world of claws. "I will buy you a new car," Jason vowed, his hand on the small of her back. "I will buy you a fleet of cars. I will burn his territory to the ground for touching your property. But you are not leaving." Chapter 14. The next morning, the Aethelgard Spire was on lockdown. Security guards with earpieces roamed every hallway. Ellie sat in the living room, trying to salvage what she could from her sewing kit. Sir Bartholomew was asleep on Jason's favorite leather armchair, completely unbothered by the impending clan war. "I need to go out," Ellie announced, standing up. Joe, who was standing by the door looking like a sentinel statue, shook his head. "Negative. Alpha's orders. You are grounded." "I am a 30-year-old woman, Joe, not a teenager," Ellie snapped, grabbing her purse. "I need to check on my grandmother. I haven't seen her since I moved in. Cade knows about the shop. I need to make sure she's safe." "We have sent a detail to watch the shop," Joe said calmly. "She is fine." "I need to see her with my own eyes," Ellie insisted. "My grandmother is 80. If she sees a bunch of large men in black suits standing outside her bakery, she'll attack them with a rolling pin." Joe sighed, the long, suffering sigh of a man who managed a stubborn alpha and now a stubborn omega. "I will escort you, but we take the armored SUV." "Fine," Ellie lied. 20 minutes later, they were in the Briar district. It was a labyrinth of narrow streets and old brick buildings, a stark contrast to the glass towers of downtown. Joe parked the SUV in the alley behind Adler's Fabrics. "Stay in the car," Joe said, checking his mirrors. "I will secure the perimeter." He stepped out, hand hovering near his jacket. As soon as he turned the corner, Ellie moved. She didn't open the door. The child locks were probably on. She climbed over the center console into the front seat. She hit the unlock button, slipped out the driver's side, and ducked into the narrow gap between the buildings. She knew these streets. Joe knew tactics, but Ellie knew the shortcuts. She scrambled over a chain-link fence, tearing the hem of her trousers, and sprinted down a parallel alleyway. She just needed 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes to hug her grandmother and tell her she was okay. She reached the back door of the shop. It was locked. She fumbled for her keys. The hair on the back of her neck stood up. The air suddenly smelled wrong. It wasn't the scent of yeast and old brick. It was a sharp, acrid smell. Like ozone and wet dog. Desperation. Ellie froze, the key halfway to the lock. She slowly turned around. 3 men stood at the end of the alley. They weren't wearing suits. They were wearing leather jackets and torn jeans. They looked rough, hungry, and they were smiling. "Lost, little sheep?" the middle one asked. He stepped forward. His eyes flashed a sickly yellow. Ellie backed up until her spine hit the door. She reached for the pepper spray in her pocket, but her hand was shaking. These weren't muggers. They were wolves. "My boyfriend is the Alpha King," Ellie said, her voice trembling but loud. "If you touch me, he will skin you." The men laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. "The king is in his tower," the man sneered, stepping closer. "And Cade pays better." Chapter 15. Ellie fumbled with the pepper spray, ripping the safety cap off. "Stay back!" The leader lunged. He moved with supernatural speed, closing the 10-foot gap in a blink. He grabbed her wrist, twisting it until the canister fell from her numb fingers. He shoved her against the brick wall, his forearm pressing against her throat. "Pretty thing," he snarled, sniffing her neck. "You smell like him. Lavender and alpha." Ellie kicked him, driving her knee into his groin. He grunted, but he didn't let go. He backhanded her. The force of the blow sent stars exploding across her vision. Her head cracked against the brick. She slid down the wall, dazed. "Bag her," the leader commanded the others. "Cade wants her alive." One of the other men pulled a heavy canvas sack from his belt. They moved in. Then, the world stopped. There was no sound, no roar, just a sudden displacement of air, like a vacuum being opened. Something massive and dark collided with the leader. He didn't just fall, he was launched. He flew 20 feet down the alley and smashed into a dumpster with a bone-shattering crunch. He didn't get up. The other two men spun around, their eyes going wide. Jason stood there. He wasn't wearing his suit. He was wearing the t-shirt from the gym, ripped at the shoulder. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving. His eyes were not just glowing. They were two suns of freezing blue fire. He didn't look human. He looked like a god of war squeezed into a mortal shape. "Mine," Jason said. The word wasn't spoken. It was vibrated into the very stones of the alley. The two remaining wolves looked at their fallen leader, then at Jason. They made the wrong choice. They attacked. It wasn't a fight. It was an execution of physics. Jason caught the first wolf's fist in midair. There was a sickening snap of breaking bone. Jason didn't pause. He spun the man around and threw him into the brick wall so hard the masonry cracked. The last wolf turned to run. Jason took 2 strides, covering distances that should be impossible, and grabbed the man by the back of his neck. He lifted him off the ground one-handed. "Tell Cade," Jason whispered, bringing the struggling wolf close to his face, "that I am coming." He threw the man. The wolf tumbled down the alley, scrambling on all 4s as he fled into the shadows. Silence fell over the alley. Ellie sat on the pavement, clutching her bruising cheek. She looked at Jason. He was standing with his back to her, his fists clenched, his whole body trembling with suppressed rage. The heart rate monitor on his wrist was a solid, high-pitched whine. Beep. "Jason," she whispered. He whipped around. For a second, looking at those feral eyes, Ellie thought he didn't recognize her. She thought the wolf had taken over. Then he saw the bruise on her face. The blue fire vanished, replaced by a horror so profound it broke his composure. He fell to his knees in the dirt, sliding toward her. "Ellie," he choked out. His hands hovered over her face, shaking violently. I was too slow. I was too slow." "You weren't," Ellie said, reaching out to touch his knee. "You found me." He grabbed her, pulling her into his lap, burying his face in her neck. He was shaking apart. He wasn't the terrifying alpha who had just dismantled 3 men. He was terrified. "Do not," he rasped against her skin. "Do not ever leave my sight again." Chapter 16. The penthouse was a fortress. The blinds were drawn. The security system was armed. Rain hammered against the glass, matching the somber mood inside. Ellie sat on the kitchen counter, holding a bag of frozen peas to her cheek. The bruise was blooming a dark purple. Jason was pacing. He had been pacing for an hour. "Sit down, Jason," Ellie said softly. "You're making Bart nervous." Sir Bartholomew was actually asleep on top of the refrigerator, entirely unbothered, but it was a good excuse. Jason stopped. He looked at her, his expression haunted. "I should have killed them." "Then you'd be in jail," Ellie said, "and I'd have to tailor orange jumpsuits. You know I don't look good in orange." A faint ghost of a smile touched Jason's lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. He walked over to the counter and stood between her knees. He reached out, gently touching the edge of the ice pack. "Does it hurt?" "Only when I laugh," Ellie said, "which I'm not doing much of right now." he sighed, leaning his forehead against hers. He smelled of rain and iron, and that deep, spicy rum scent that made her feel safe. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I brought this to your door. Cade is targeting you because of me." "He's targeting me because he's a bully," Ellie corrected. "And because I drew a mustache on you and made you look human. It ruined his narrative of you being a monster." Jason pulled back slightly to look at her. "I am a monster, Ellie. You saw me in that alley. That wasn't civilized." "It was necessary," Ellie said firmly. "You saved me. A monster would have let them hurt me to prove a point." She reached out, tracing the scar on his eyebrow. "You're just a man, Jason. A very stressed, sleep-deprived man with anger management issues and a cat obsession." Jason let out a breath that sounded like a laugh. He trapped her hand against his cheek. "I don't want this to be fake anymore." The words hung in the quiet kitchen. The refrigerator hummed. The rain beat against the glass. Ellie's heart skipped a beat. "What?" "The engagement," Jason said, his voice rough. "The contract. I don't care about the summit. I don't care about the image." He looked at her, his gaze intense and vulnerable. "When I couldn't find you today, when I smelled your fear in that alley, I realized that if anything happened to you, I would burn this city to ash." He leaned closer. His lips were inches from hers. "I don't want to pretend, Ellie. I want you to be mine. For real." Ellie stared at him. This was it. The moment. He was offering her everything. Protection, wealth, him. But then she thought of Cade. She thought of the men in the alley. She thought of the target painted on her back. If she said yes, she wasn't just accepting a boyfriend. She was accepting a war. "Jason," she whispered, her voice trembling. Before she could answer, a loud thump echoed from the hallway. They both jumped. Jason spun around, placing himself in front of her. Joe walked into the kitchen, looking disheveled. He was holding a large, ornate wooden box. "Sorry to interrupt," Joe said, looking between them. "But the courier just delivered this. It's from the Council of Elders. It's the ceremonial mantle." Jason relaxed slightly, but the moment was broken. The intimacy evaporated, replaced by the crushing weight of duty. "The mantle," Jason muttered, running a hand through his hair. "Right, the summit." He looked back at Ellie. The vulnerability was gone, hidden behind the mask of the king. "We'll talk later," he said, his voice distant. "I have to inspect the robes." Ellie watched him go, clutching the frozen peas. She felt cold. He had almost kissed her. He had almost claimed her, and now the world had crashed back in. Chapter 17. The rainstorm battered the glass walls of the Aethelgard Spire, turning the city into a blur of gray and neon. Inside the penthouse kitchen, the mood was heavy, suffocated by the presence of the ornate wooden box sitting on the island. Jason stood staring at it, his arms crossed over his chest. He was still vibrating with the adrenaline of the rescue, his ice-blue eyes dark and stormy. Ellie sat on the stool, the bag of frozen peas pressed to her throbbing cheek. The bruise was already blooming a violent shade of purple, a stark contrast to her pale skin. "The ceremonial mantle," Jason said, his voice dripping with disdain. 300 years of history, smelling like mothballs and hypocrisy. "It's just a robe, Jason," Ellie said softly, though her head was pounding. "Wear it, give the speech, take it off." "It's not just a robe. It's a symbol. It represents the old ways, the ways that allow men like Cade to exist." Jason ran a hand through his hair, wincing slightly as he touched a sore spot on his shoulder, a souvenir from the alley fight. Vargo, the council's tailor, insisted on sending a repair kit with it. Apparently, a seam came loose during transport. He gestured to a smaller leather pouch resting on top of the box. "I have to take a call," Jason said, his phone buzzing in his pocket. "The council is demanding an explanation for the disturbance in the Briar district. I have to tell them I didn't murder 3 of their citizens." He leaned down, pressing a quick, fierce kiss to the top of Ellie's head, careful not to touch her bruise. "Don't touch the box. It's probably cursed with boredom." He walked out, heading for his study. Joe followed him, looking grim. Ellie was left alone with the peas, the box, and Sir Bartholomew. The cat, who had been asleep on the refrigerator, opened one orange eye. He stretched, hopped down to the counter with a soft thump, and trotted over to the wooden box. He sniffed it. Then he hissed. It was a sound Ellie had never heard him make. Bart was a lover, not a fighter. He swatted at the smaller leather pouch, the repair kit, knocking it onto the floor. It burst open. Spools of gold and silver thread rolled across the pristine tiles. "Bart!" Ellie scolded, sliding off the stool. "Jason is going to turn you into a pair of slippers." She knelt to gather the spools. As she picked up a spool of thick, golden thread intended for the collar embroidery, she paused. Her fingers were sensitive to texture. It was her job. This thread felt wrong. It was waxy, slick. She frowned, lifting it to her nose. Beneath the smell of metallic dye, there was something else. A faint, sweet herbal scent, like crushed almonds and rot. Ellie's heart skipped a beat. She knew textiles, she knew dyes, but she also knew botany. Her grandmother used old-world herbs in her teas. She stood up, grabbing her magnifying loupe from her purse on the counter. She pulled a single thread loose and held it under the kitchen's pendant light. The thread wasn't just dyed gold. It was coated. A microscopic, crystalline residue clung to the fibers. "Wolfsbane," Ellie whispered, the blood draining from her face. It wasn't just a repair kit. It was a delivery system. If this thread was sewn into the collar, right against the jugular, where the skin was thin and sweat would accumulate under the heavy velvet, the toxin would absorb directly into the bloodstream. It wouldn't kill an alpha instantly. It would make him hallucinate. It would make him paranoid. It would make him look insane on stage in front of the entire council. It was a coup. Chapter 18. The next morning, the day of the lunar summit, the Aethelgard Spire was a hive of chaotic activity. Ellie had barely slept. She had spent the night researching wolfsbane absorption rates on her phone under the covers, terrified to alert Jason until she was sure. If she was wrong, she would look paranoid. If she was right, telling him might trigger the trap early if Cade had spies in the building. She needed to prove it. At 10 a.m., Jason was already gone. Joe informed her he was in the sanctum, a soundproof, secure chamber on the 40th floor where the Alpha King underwent the traditional pre-summit cleansing ritual. He was unreachable. "I need to speak to him," Ellie told the guard outside the elevator. She was clutching her heavy-duty shears in her pocket, her hand sweating. "The Alpha is in the sanctum, Miss Adler," the guard said, not moving. "No entry. Protocol." "It's an emergency," Ellie insisted. The bruise on her cheek throbbed in time with her heartbeat. "It's about the mantle." "The mantle has already been delivered to the antechamber," the guard said boredly. "Vargo is preparing it for the ceremony." Ellie's stomach dropped. Vargo, the council tailor. If he was there, he wasn't just repairing the seam. He was activating the poison. "Where is the antechamber?" Ellie demanded. 41st floor, adjacent to the sanctum, but you can't—" Ellie didn't listen. She turned and sprinted for the stairwell. The elevator required a keycard she didn't have for that floor, but the fire stairs were accessible. She ran up 10 flights of stairs, her lungs burning. She burst onto the 40th floor landing, gasping for air. The hallway was lined with velvet ropes and guarded by 2 massive wolves from the council's security detail, not Jason's men. Through the open double doors at the end of the hall, she saw it. The ceremonial mantle hung on a mannequin in the center of the room. It was a monstrosity of heavy crimson velvet and gold embroidery. A man, short, balding, wearing a tailor's apron, was standing over it, a needle in his hand. He was stitching the collar. Vargo. He was sewing the poison thread right into the neckband. Jason was in the next room, behind a sealed steel door. He would come out, walk into this room, put on the robe, and within an hour he would be foaming at the mouth. Ellie checked the guards. They were looking at her, confused by the disheveled woman in the bruised face and rumpled trousers. "Hey!" one shouted. "Clear the floor!" Ellie didn't clear the floor. She reached into her pocket and gripped the handle of her shears. She didn't have time to explain. She didn't have time to argue. She only had time to destroy the weapon. She charged. Chapter 19. Stop her! The guards scrambled, their heavy boots slipping on the polished marble. But Ellie had the element of surprise and the desperation of a woman in love. She ducked under the first guard's grasping arm. She wasn't a fighter, but she was small and fast. She slid across the floor in her socks, scrambling past the second guard who was trying to unholster his taser. She burst into the antechamber. Vargo looked up, his eyes widening behind his spectacles. "You! What are you doing?" Ellie didn't answer. She lunged for the mannequin. "Don't touch that!" Vargo shrieked, stabbing the needle toward her. Ellie slapped his hand away with a ferocity that surprised them both. She grabbed the collar of the mantle, the heavy, poison-laced velvet, and raised her shears. Snip. The sound was small, but the destruction was absolute. These shears were designed to cut through leather and canvas. Ancient, rotting velvet stood no chance. Ellie hacked at the collar. She ripped through the gold embroidery. She slashed the sleeves. "Treason!" Vargo screamed, backing away as if she were a demon. "She's destroying the heritage!" The guards burst into the room. "Drop the weapon! On the ground! Now!" Ellie didn't stop. She grabbed the body of the robe and drove the scissors down the back seam, rending the fabric in two. It felt good. It felt like killing a snake. "Get off the garment!" A guard tackled her. Ellie hit the floor hard, the breath knocked out of her. Her shears skittered across the marble. The guard pinned her arms behind her back, pressing her face, her bruised cheek, into the cold stone. "Secure the prisoner!" the guard yelled. "Get the shackles!" The heavy steel door of the sanctum hissed open. Steam poured out, swirling around a massive silhouette. Jason stepped into the antechamber. He was wearing only a towel around his waist, his skin glistening with water and steam, his hair dripping wet. He looked like a primal god disturbed from his slumber. He blinked, clearing the steam from his eyes. He saw the scene before him. Vargo, cowering in the corner. The pile of shredded crimson velvet on the floor, looking like a slaughtered animal. And Ellie, pinned under a council guard, her face pressed to the floor. The temperature in the room plummeted. "Get off her," Jason said. It wasn't a shout. It was a command so infused with alpha power that the guard physically flinched, releasing Ellie and scrambling back as if burned. Jason walked forward, his bare feet silent on the marble. He looked at the ruined mantle. He looked at Vargo. Then he looked at Ellie, who was pushing herself up to her knees, gasping for breath. "Ellie," Jason said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Why is the 300-year-old ceremonial mantle in ribbons?" Chapter 20. The silence in the antechamber was brittle. Vargo was trembling, pointing a shaking finger at Ellie. "She is mad!" Vargo sputtered. "She is an assassin sent by the rebels. She destroyed the legacy. Look at it. It is ruined. You cannot wear this. The council will demand her head." The guards had their hands on their weapons, unsure where to aim, at the girl or at the half-naked, furious Alpha King. Ellie stood up slowly. Her ribs ached. Her cheek was throbbing. She felt small and messy next to Jason's overwhelming physical presence, even in a towel. She didn't defend herself to the guards. She didn't look at Vargo. She looked straight into Jason's ice-blue eyes. "It was a trap," she said. Her voice was raspy but steady. Jason didn't blink. He didn't look at the evidence. He just looked at her. "Explain." "The thread," Ellie said, pointing to the scattered spools Vargo had dropped. "The gold thread for the collar repair. It's coated in wolfsbane concentrate." Vargo turned pale. "Lies. She is lying to cover her crime." "If he wears that," Ellie continued, ignoring the tailor, "and he sweats, the toxin absorbs into the bloodstream. It causes hallucinations, paranoia, madness. They wanted you to lose your mind on stage, Jason." "Ridiculous!" Vargo shouted, stepping forward. "I have served the council for 40 years. I would never—" "Pick it up," Jason said. Vargo froze. "My lord?" "The thread," Jason said, gesturing to the floor. "Pick it up. Lick it." The room went dead silent. Vargo stared at the gold thread on the floor. Sweat beaded on his forehead. That is unsanitary, Alpha. I cannot." "If it is just thread," Jason said, taking a menacing step toward the tailor, "then it is harmless. If you won't taste it, then you know what is on it." Vargo's knees buckled. He scrambled backward, turning to bolt for the door. "Joe!" Jason barked. Joe, who had just arrived at the elevator doors, stepped calmly into Vargo's path, blocking the exit. Vargo collapsed, sobbing. Jason turned back to Ellie. He looked at the ruined pile of velvet, millions of dollars of history, destroyed in seconds. He looked at her bruised face, the fierce determination in her amber eyes. She had risked treason charges, imprisonment, and death to save him. She hadn't waited for permission. She had just acted. Jason stepped over the ruined mantle. He reached out and cupped her face, his thumb brushing the bruise gently. "You destroyed the mantle," he murmured. "It was ugly anyway," Ellie whispered, her adrenaline fading into exhaustion. Jason let out a short, sharp laugh. He turned to the guards who were still staring in shock. "Release her," Jason commanded, "and arrest the tailor." "But, Alpha," one guard stammered, looking at the shredded fabric. "The summit starts in 2 hours. You have no mantle. You have no ceremonial attire. You cannot appear before the elders in a towel." Jason looked at the pile of rags. Then he looked at Ellie. A slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. "I don't need a mantle," Jason said, his eyes locking onto hers. "I have a tailor." He pulled Ellie closer, ignoring the audience. "Can you fix this? Not the robe. Me." Ellie looked at him. She thought of the midnight blue suit hanging in the closet, the one she had reinforced with Kevlar, the one she had sewn with silver thread, the one she had made not for a king, but for a warrior. "I can do better than fix it," Ellie said, a spark lighting in her eyes. "I can dress you for war." Chapter 21. The elevator ride back to the penthouse was silent, but the air was thick enough to choke on. Jason stood in the corner, wearing a pair of tactical pants a guard had retrieved for him, his chest bare and still damp from the sanctum steam. He was staring at the floor, his jaw clenched so tight, a muscle feathered in his cheek. Ellie leaned against the opposite wall, clutching her heavy-duty shears. Her hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. Her cheek throbbed, a deep, rhythmic ache that radiated into her jaw. "You're hurt," Jason said. He didn't look up, but his voice was rough. "I'm fine," Ellie said, though she winced as the elevator stopped. "We have 90 minutes, Jason. We don't have time for a medical exam." The doors slid open. They burst into the penthouse. "Joe!" Jason barked. Though the beta wasn't there yet, he was still securing Vargo. Jason switched to his comms earpiece. "Security, lock down the summit hall. No one enters or leaves until I arrive. If Cade so much as sneezes, put a laser dot on his forehead." Ellie ran to the guest suite. She grabbed her emergency kit, needles, steam iron, and the special silver thread she kept in a velvet pouch. She sprinted back to the master bedroom. Jason was already in the walk-in closet, staring at the suit hanging in the center. It wasn't the midnight blue tuxedo from the gala. This was the war suit. Constructed from heavy charcoal wool, it looked almost black in the dim light. But if you looked closely, you could see the glint of the silver thread woven into the pinstripes. Ellie had sourced the thread from a supplier who usually dealt with anti-ballistic manufacturing. It wasn't just decorative. It was conductive and, more importantly, reinforced with a synthetic polymer that was stronger than steel wire. "Put it on," Ellie commanded, plugging in her steamer. Jason stripped off the tactical pants without a word. He pulled on the charcoal trousers. They fit perfectly, sliding over his muscular thighs without a single wrinkle. Ellie moved in. She didn't ask permission. She buttoned his crisp white shirt, her fingers flying. She grabbed the waistcoat, the one she had fitted in the library during their almost kiss. "Turn," she said. Jason turned. Ellie cinched the back. She smoothed the fabric over his shoulders. "The lining," Ellie murmured, pressing her hand against his chest. "I used a double layer of Kevlar weave between the wool and the silk. It's slash-resistant. It won't stop a bullet at close range, but it will stop a knife." Jason looked down at her. He caught her hand, pressing it against his heart. The heart rate monitor on his wrist was steady now, a low, rhythmic beep. "You knew," Jason said quietly. "You knew I would need armor." "I hoped you wouldn't," Ellie whispered, looking up at him. The bruise on her cheek was dark and angry under the harsh closet lights. "But I wasn't going to let you walk into a snake pit naked." She reached for the jacket. It was heavy. The shoulders were structured, giving him a silhouette that was imposing and terrifyingly broad. As he slipped his arms into it, the transformation was complete. He wasn't just a CEO. He wasn't just a king. He was a weapon, wrapped in charcoal wool. Ellie stepped back, critical eyes scanning him. "The tie, silver, to match the thread." She knotted it for him, pulling it tight. She smoothed the lapels. "Perfect," she breathed. Jason turned to the full-length mirror. He looked at himself. Then he looked at Ellie's reflection behind him. Bruised, messy hair, wearing rumpled clothes, holding a steamer wand like a scepter. "Not yet," Jason said. He turned around. I'm not walking in there without you. Jason, look at me. Ellie gestured to her face. I look like I lost a fight with a sidewalk. I can't go to a summit. You aren't going as a prop, Jason growled. You are going as my partner. And if anyone asks about the bruise, I will tell them exactly who gave it to you. He grabbed a dress from the back of the closet, a sleek, long-sleeved black gown she had brought but never worn. Put it on. We leave in 10 minutes. Chapter 22. The grand hall of the summit was a cavernous amphitheater of stone and stained glass. The air smelled of old money, power, and the musk of 300 alpha wolves. The council of elders sat on a raised dais, looking ancient and bored. Below them, the floor was crowded with the heads of the various packs. Alpha Cade stood near the front, holding a glass of champagne. He looked smug. He was checking his watch every 30 seconds. He's late, Cade said loudly to the Iron River delegation. Perhaps the king is feeling unwell? A ripple of laughter went through his sycophants. They knew the plan. Jason should be convulsing on the floor of the sanctum right now, frothing at the mouth from the wolfsbane. Boom! The massive oak doors of the hall didn't open. They were thrown open. Silence slammed into the room. Jason Hale stood in the archway. He wasn't wearing the crimson ceremonial mantle. He wasn't stumbling. He wasn't hallucinating. He was wearing a charcoal suit that seemed to absorb the light. The silver pinstripes glinted like drawn blades. He looked modern, lethal, and utterly in control. And on his arm was Ellie. She wore black, a stark contrast to her pale skin. Her hair was swept up, revealing the dark purple bruise on her cheek. She didn't hide it with makeup. She wore it like war paint. They walked down the center aisle. The sound of Jason's dress shoes and Ellie's heels on the stone floor echoed in the deadly silence. Cade's smile faltered. He crushed the stem of his champagne glass. What is this? He hissed. Where is the mantle? Jason didn't look at the council. He walked straight toward the center of the room, stopping 10 feet from Cade. Apologies for the delay, Jason's voice rang out, amplified by the acoustics of the hall. He didn't need a microphone. I had a wardrobe malfunction. It seems the old traditions unraveled. A gasp went through the room. To appear without the mantle was an insult, but Jason looked so terrifyingly powerful that no one dared to voice it. Alpha Hale, the head elder croaked from the dais. You break protocol. You must wear the mantle to accept the renewal of your reign. Protocols change, Jason said, his eyes locking onto Cade. Just like alliances. Just like enemies. He released Ellie's arm, gently guiding her a step behind him, not to hide her, but to clear the field of fire. Cade stepped forward. He recovered his composure quickly. He smiled, spreading his arms wide. A bold choice, Jason, Cade said, his voice smooth as oil. But we are all brothers here. Let us not stand on ceremony. Come, the handshake of peace. Cade extended his right hand. Ellie, standing behind Jason, saw the glint. On Cade's middle finger was a large onyx ring. But as he turned his hand, a tiny silver needle extended from the setting. It was no longer than a millimeter, enough to prick the skin, enough to deliver a toxin. Jason, Ellie whispered. But Jason had already seen it. His eyes flashed blue. He didn't back down. He stepped into Cade's space. Peace, Jason said, his voice dropping to a growl. Let's see if you can keep it. Chapter 23. The room held its breath. The handshake of peace was sacred. To refuse it was a declaration of war. To accept it was a binding contract of non-aggression. Cade thrust his hand forward, aiming not for Jason's hand, but making a feint to clap him on the shoulder. A brotherly gesture that would drive the needle straight into Jason's chest, right over the heart. It was a clumsy move, disguised as enthusiasm. Jason didn't block it. He expanded his chest, meeting the blow. Cade's hand slammed into the lapel of the charcoal suit. Snap! The sound was small, sharp, and sickeningly clear in the silent hall. It sounded like a dry twig breaking. Cade froze. His eyes widened. He pulled his hand back as if he had touched a hot stove. Sticking out of the charcoal wool, trapped in the dense weave, was the tip of a silver needle. The rest of the needle was shattered on the floor. The poison, a bright green liquid, leaked out of the broken reservoir in the ring, dripping harmlessly down the front of Jason's suit. It sizzled slightly as it hit the silver thread, burning a tiny hole in the wool but stopping dead at the Kevlar lining underneath. Jason looked down at the green stain. Then he looked up at Cade. "Careless," Jason said. The crowd erupted. "Poison!" someone screamed. "He tried to kill him! Treachery!" The council elders stood up shouting orders. Guards drew weapons. The Iron River Wolves looked around, panicked, realizing their alpha had just been caught red-handed in front of the entire nation. Cade stumbled back, clutching his hand. "No, it was an accident, a defect." Jason took a step forward. He brushed at the stain on his chest. The charcoal wool was ruined, but the man beneath it was untouched. "You tried to poison me with a robe," Jason said, his voice booming over the chaos. "That failed. So you tried to stab me with a handshake. That failed." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the spool of gold thread Ellie had salvaged from the kitchen. He tossed it onto the floor at Cade's feet. "Wolfsbane," Jason said. "The same poison you used to try and break my mind." Cade looked at the thread, then at the needle. He was cornered. His face twisted into a snarl. "You think you're untouchable, Hale. You're just a man in a suit. I am the apex," Jason roared, his eyes fully shifting to the blinding blue of the Alpha King. The pressure in the room dropped, forcing wolves to their knees. "And you are done." Jason didn't attack. He didn't need to. He pointed a finger at Cade. "Arrest him," Jason commanded the council guard, "for high treason and for vandalism of a 1985 Volvo." Chapter 24. The guards swarmed Cade. He didn't fight. He knew he was outmatched. As they dragged the screaming Alpha away, the hall descended into a stunned silence. Jason stood alone in the center of the circle, the green poison stain marring the perfection of his charcoal suit. He looked at the council elders, who were pale and shaking. "The mantle is destroyed," Jason announced, his voice steady. "The traditions that allowed a poisoner to sit among us are dead." He turned around. He held out his hand to Ellie. Ellie stepped out of the shadows. She walked to him, her head high, the bruise on her face a testament to the violence she had survived. She took his hand. Jason pulled her to his side. He looked at the crowd. He looked at the cameras that were broadcasting this live to the entire city. "You ask about my suit?" Jason said, touching the lapel where the needle had snapped. "You ask why I broke tradition?" He looked down at Ellie. The look in his eyes wasn't terrifying anymore. It was reverent. "I am alive," Jason said, "because I stopped trusting in ancient velvet and started trusting in competence." He raised Ellie's hand, kissing her knuckles. "This is Ellie Adler," Jason declared. "She is my partner. She is my mate." A gasp went through the room. "And," Jason added, a smirk touching his lips as he gestured to the Kevlar-lined suit that had just saved his life, "she is the only person in this city who knows how to dress a king for war." The cameras flashed. The crowd, sensing the shift in power, began to clap. It started slow, then built into a roar. The Mustache King. The War Tailor. The narrative had shifted instantly. Jason leaned down, ignoring the hundreds of people watching. "You saved me," he whispered against her ear. "You owe me a new car," Ellie whispered back, tears pricking her eyes. "I'll buy you a dealership," Jason promised. He cupped her face, his thumb brushing the bruise one last time. Then, in front of the council, the cameras, and the entire werewolf nation, he kissed her. It wasn't a fake kiss. It wasn't a stage kiss. It was deep, possessive, and promised a lifetime of trouble. When he pulled back, breathless, Ellie smiled. She reached up and straightened his tie. "You got poison on the wool," she scolded softly. "That's never coming out." "Keep it," Jason said, pulling her against his chest as the crowd cheered. "It adds character." Chapter 25. The ride back to the Aethelgard Spire was a blur of flashing lights and screaming crowds, but inside the armored SUV, the silence was heavy and electric. Jason hadn't let go of Ellie's hand since they left the stage. His grip was tight, his thumb tracing the pulse point on her wrist, checking over and over that she was real, that she was safe, that she was his. When the elevator doors opened into the penthouse, the adrenaline that had sustained them through the summit finally crashed, replaced by a raw, consuming hunger. Jason didn't wait. He pulled Ellie out of the elevator, kicking the door shut behind them with a resounding thud. He backed her against the wall, his hands framing her face. His ice-blue eyes were blown wide, searching her features. "You're shaking," he murmured, his voice rough. "I'm okay," Ellie whispered, though her knees felt like water. She reached up, touching the lapel of his charcoal suit. The green poison stain was a stark, ugly mark on the beautiful wool. "I ruined your suit." "It served its purpose," Jason growled. He shrugged the jacket off, letting the ruined garment, worth thousands of dollars, drop to the floor like a rag. He didn't care. He only cared about the woman standing in front of him in the sleek black gown. He cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing the dark purple bruise Cade's men had left. His expression darkened, a flash of pain crossing his face. "I will never forgive myself for this," he said softly. "It's just a bruise, Jason," Ellie said, covering his hand with hers. "It heals. We survived. You survived." "Because of you," Jason said. "You walked into a den of vipers, armed with nothing but a pair of scissors and a needle. You stood between me and death." He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. The scent of him, spiced rum, mahogany, and the sharp tang of ozone, wrapped around her, overwhelming her senses. "I don't want to be alone anymore, Ellie," he confessed, his voice breaking. "I have spent 10 years building a fortress to keep people out, but it's just cold. It's so cold without you." Ellie's heart ached. She reached up, tangling her fingers in the hair at the nape of his neck. "Then don't be alone. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." Jason let out a shuddering breath. He kissed her. It wasn't the showy public kiss from the stage. It was desperate, reverent, and deeply intimate. He kissed her like he was drowning and she was oxygen. He lifted her effortlessly, carrying her down the hall to the master bedroom, the forbidden zone she had only entered once to wake him from a nightmare. Now, she was being carried into it as a queen. He set her down on the edge of the massive bed. Sir Bartholomew, who had been sleeping on the pillows, cracked one eye open, judged them, and decided to relocate to the armchair with a huff. Jason knelt between her knees, looking up at her. He unbuttoned his shirt, revealing the Kevlar vest beneath, then stripped that off too, leaving his chest bare. "I claim you," Jason whispered, his eyes glowing with the alpha light. "Not as a tailor, not as a fake fiancé, as my equal, as my mate." Ellie leaned down, pressing a kiss to the scar on his eyebrow. "I claim you, Jason Hale. Grumpy attitude, cat obsession, and all." When he finally claimed her mark, biting gently into the sensitive curve of her neck to seal the bond, the rush of emotion wasn't pain. It was a golden, warm flood of belonging. For the first time in his life, the Alpha King wasn't a weapon. He was home. Chapter 26. The next morning, the sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, blindingly bright. Ellie woke up wrapped in a duvet that had a thread count higher than her credit score. She stretched, wincing slightly as her bruised cheek pulled, but the pain was duller today. She turned over. The other side of the bed was empty, but the shower was running. She smiled, burying her face in Jason's pillow. It smelled like him. Suddenly, her phone on the nightstand blew up. It didn't just buzz. It vibrated continuously, like it was having a seizure. Buzz, 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 buzz. Ellie groaned, reaching for it. Who is texting me at 8 a.m.? She unlocked the screen. She had 400 missed notifications. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, every app was melting down. She opened a text from Joe. It was just a link and a message. "Turn on the TV. Now." Ellie scrambled out of bed, grabbing Jason's discarded dress shirt to cover herself. She ran into the living room and hunted for the remote. She turned on the giant wall-mounted screen. It was tuned to the Luminova News Network. The anchor was trying, and failing, to keep a straight face. Behind her, a massive image was projected on the screen. It was Jason. But it wasn't the terrifying Alpha King in a war suit. It wasn't the CEO shaking hands. It was a high-resolution close-up photo of Jason Hale, fast asleep in his leather chair, mouth slightly open, wearing a perfectly drawn, villainous black handlebar mustache. The headline chyron read, "The Mustache King? Alpha Hale's secret look goes viral." "Oh no," Ellie whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. The bathroom door opened. Jason walked out, a towel wrapped low around his hips, drying his hair. He looked relaxed, younger, happier than she had ever seen him. "Good morning," he rumbled, smiling at her. "Why is the TV on?" He looked at the screen. He froze. The towel in his hand stopped moving. On the TV, the news anchor was saying, "Sources say the photo was accidentally uploaded to the Hale Holdings internal server by a weary assistant late last night, and leak accounts picked it up instantly. The hashtag Mustache King is currently trending #1 globally, beating out the Summit Treaty." Jason stared at the image of himself with the mustache. His left eye twitched. "Joe," Jason said. It was a whisper of pure horror. "He must have pulled it from my phone," Ellie realized, her eyes widening. "When he did the security sweep of my device last week to find Mark's texts, he must have found the photo I took and saved it to the server." And he uploaded the wrong file, Jason finished, his voice trembling with rage. Ellie bit her lip, trying desperately not to laugh. Jason, look at the chyron. Internet falls in love with adorable alpha. Adorable? Jason choked out. I am the apex predator of the Western Hemisphere. I am a warlord. I am terrifying. You're a meme, honey, Ellie giggled, unable to hold it back anymore. Jason turned to her, his face flushing a deep crimson. This is your fault. You and your indelible marker. It humanized you, Ellie pointed out, gesturing to the screen, where a montage of TikToks recreating the mustache look was playing. Look! People aren't scared of you anymore. They think you're cuddly. Cuddly, Jason repeated, looking like he wanted to jump out the window. I'm going to fire Joe. I'm going to fire him into the sun. Chapter 27. By noon, the crisis meeting in the penthouse living room had taken a strange turn. Joe sat at the table, looking exhausted but unrepentant. Jason was pacing, wearing a fresh pair of jeans and a black t-shirt, glaring at his tablet. Ellie was sitting on the floor with Sir Bartholomew, eating a croissant. Stock prices are up 8%, Joe read from his laptop. Approval ratings for the Hale pack are at an all-time high of 92%. Why? Jason demanded, slamming the tablet down. I look like a silent film villain who got hit by a truck. Because you look human, Alpha, Joe said calmly. For 10 years, the public saw you as a cold, unapproachable machine. This photo? It proves you sleep. It proves you have people in your life who feel comfortable enough to prank you. It proves you have a sense of humor, even if forced. I don't have a sense of humor, Jason growled. The public disagrees, Joe said. They love the narrative, the terrifying king and the cheeky Tailor who draws on his face. It's a modern fairy tale. Ellie chimed in, scrolling through her phone. Listen to this tweet from @WerewolfFan99. I used to be scared of Jason Hale, but knowing he naps like a dad and lets his fiancée roast him makes me want to buy his stock. #Mustache King, #relationship goals. Jason groaned, burying his face in his hands. I can never leave the house again. Actually, Joe said, checking his email, marketing suggests we lean into it. They want to sell a limited run of Hale mustache merchandise. Proceeds go to charity. Jason lifted his head. He looked at Ellie. She was grinning at him, her amber eyes sparkling with mischief. Charity? Jason asked. For the Wolf Pup Rescue Fund, Ellie suggested. Jason sighed. The fight went out of him. He walked over to Ellie, crouching down so he was eye level with her. You realized you ruined my reputation as a tyrant, right? I saved your soul, Ellie corrected, reaching out to smooth his hair. Being a tyrant is lonely. Being the Mustache King? That comes with a family. Jason leaned into her touch. He looked at Joe. Fine, Jason grumbled. Print the shirts. But if anyone calls me cuddly to my face, the deal is off. Chapter 28. 1 year later. The bell above the door of Adler's Fabrics chimed cheerfully. The shop smelled of lavender, beeswax, and fresh paint. It had been fully renovated, the old rotting floors replaced with gleaming hardwood, the drafty windows swapped for energy-efficient glass. Ellie Adler stood behind the counter, cutting a length of silk for a customer. She looked tired, but it was a good tired. The shop was thriving. Thank you, Mrs. Gable, Ellie said, handing over the package. Tell Mr. Gable the vest will be ready Tuesday. As the customer left, the back curtain parted. Jason walked in. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing jeans and a soft gray sweater that Ellie had knitted for him. It had taken 3 tries, but she finally got the shoulders right. He was holding a carrier. "Did you pick him up?" Ellie asked, smiling. "He bit the vet," Jason said fondly, setting the carrier on the counter. "Sir Bartholomew is banned from the grooming palace." "He takes after his father," Ellie teased. Jason walked around the counter. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. He rested his chin on her shoulder. "Are you ready to go?" he asked. "The dealership called. Your custom order arrived." "Is it mint green?" Ellie asked. "It is an abhorrent shade of mint green," Jason confirmed, "just like you wanted. But it has reinforced glass and a run-flat tire system. I compromised." Ellie laughed, turning in his arms to face him. "You're a control freak." "I'm a protector," Jason corrected, kissing her nose. He glanced around the shop. It was warm. It was safe. It was theirs. His eyes landed on a framed photo on the wall behind the register. It wasn't a wedding photo. It was the viral photo of him with the mustache, signed by both of them. "I still hate that picture," Jason murmured. "I love it," Ellie said. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a marker. It wasn't the industrial fabric marker. She had retired that one. It was a simple black Sharpie. "Close your eyes," Ellie whispered. "Ellie," Jason warned, though his eyes were already dancing with amusement. "I am the Alpha King." "And I am the War Tailor," Ellie countered. "Close them." Jason sighed, a sound of pure contentment, and closed his eyes. Ellie uncapped the marker. She didn't draw a mustache this time. She leaned up and pressed a quick, soft kiss to his lips. Then, she capped the marker and placed it in his hand. "Your turn," she whispered. Jason opened his eyes. He looked at the marker, then at his mate. He smiled, a real, unguarded smile that lit up the room. "I think," Jason said, tossing the marker into the trash bin, "I'll just kiss you instead." And he did. The end. Quick favor, don't go anywhere yet. If you thought Ellie was brave for taking a permanent marker to the Alpha King's face, wait until you meet the heroine in this next story on your screen. You have to hear this disaster unfold. Click the video on your screen right now. It is absolutely unhinged.